Welcome back for part 2 of the valve cover gasket replacement. Okay, so next we're going to clean up the cylinder head before we put the new valve cover gasket on. And so I've got some towels here, paper towels. Normally I would not use these, but I don't have any of the blue shop towels. That's what I would normally use because they're a lot less, they contain a lot less lint than these do. So what you can do here is just wipe this off. See how that looks? You may also want to use some brake cleaner. So I would spray the brake cleaner on the towel, not on the cylinder head, and then just wipe it and let that evaporate. Also, I've got a flexible putty knife here so I can scrape a little bit. You want to scrape towards the outside of the cylinder head so you're not dropping debris in the cylinder head. You can also use a razor. Just be very careful with this. You don't want to be scraping into the cylinder head. And so I would keep it at like a 90-degree angle to the cylinder head so you're not digging into it. So I think what I'm going to use here, I'm going to use some brake cleaner, see if that works, and clean this up pretty quickly, hopefully. Alright, so I'm just going to go around the rest of the cylinder head and then I'll talk about this area over here where we have gasket material. Alright, so I'm going to continue to clean up the corners. Again, the screwdriver seems to work fairly well. The way this engine is mounted, it's really hard to reach these corners. So this screwdriver, flexible putty knife, small razor, whatever you can get in there, as long as you don't damage the cylinder head, should be fine. So I'm going to finish this up and then we'll talk about putting our new gasket and our tube seals on. Alright, so now we've got everything cleaned up. I'm going to put the valve cover kit on. This is what you get when you buy it through Honda. It's part number 12030-PY3-000. So I use this one usually. You can also, as you saw, I use the fel-pro kit every once in a while, depending on what's available, what's actually available close to me sometimes. So this one comes with the valve cover gasket right there. You also get the tube seals, and then the last part of the kit is these grommets. So either the fel-pro gasket or the Honda gasket, they both work. The Honda gasket has more pronounced nubs right there, you can see hopefully. These little nubs there, and what those are for is to help keep the gasket on the valve cover. The ones on the fel-pro kit are a little bit smaller. This could also be because they've been compressed over time from having been installed on the valve cover. Alright, so right here, you'll notice, hopefully you can see that, this is where the gasket starts to change direction, and that's where you put your sealant, because that is a vulnerable spot. If you don't put any sealant there, you could have a leak develop out all these corners. There's 4 corners to worry about. Alright, so you're going to need some gasket maker like this. This is Permatex Ultra Gray. You can also use Honda Bond. Honda Bond is a recommended gasket maker, but this stuff works just fine. I've never had any trouble with Permatex Ultra Gray. So I'm going to put this on the valve cover. Should just slot in nicely there. Now, if you're not confident that this is going to stay like this, you could put a little bit of gasket material like over here in the corner. Just a tiny bit like here. Maybe 4 corners. Just to make sure that it stays on so you can get it back on the cylinder head. Alright, then we'll put our tube seals on. Alright, there's that. And then we'll put the grommets on when we put the valve cover back on the cylinder head. Alright, so as you can see, I've got the cylinder head and the valve cover all cleaned up. So now at this stage, I always kind of think in my head, okay, what are my next steps? Because we have to get that gasket material on either. I usually like to put it on the cylinder head, honestly, but you can put it directly on the valve cover gasket. The main reason why I don't put it on the valve cover gasket, I put it on the cylinder head usually, is because I'm worried about touching it or smearing it as I'm trying to put the valve cover back on the cylinder head. So this Permatex is really dried out. There is some, looks like some material down there that's not dried out, so I'm going to open this up here. That's what it looks like. It's pretty thick stuff, so it should make a pretty nice gasket. Take some of that out. I'll normally use a pick tool that has a right angle on it, and that's because I can reach down in there. Put a little bit on in this corner here. So you may want to do both. I wouldn't get carried away with this stuff, but you may want to put it both on the cylinder head and on the valve cover gasket. Okay, again, we're just covering this area here on the valve cover gasket. Okay, this is ready to go. If you grab it on the bracket back there, you can lift it up and pull it back. So that works pretty well. And it felt like the gasket came out. So that can happen sometimes. The gasket can pop out. That's one reason why it's a good idea to put some gasket material between the valve cover and the gasket. Alright, so that is back on now, back on the cylinder head. Now you just want to kind of move it just a little bit to seat it, like that. Get it on there, nice and seated, so that material makes good contact. And now, I'm going to put our grommets on and our nuts. So the order of tightening is top left, bottom left, top right, bottom right. So you want to do this in about 2 to 3 different stages of tightening, and then ultimately you want to tighten it down to 9 foot-pounds. Or 8.7 according to the service manual. There's our one grommet. Put these in. Fourth grommet on down there. Okay. Then we'll put our nuts on. Get those started. You probably noticed that I forgot to reinstall the ground wire on the bottom right valve cover stud, so I corrected that mistake later. Okay, now I'm going to tighten this one first by hand. And I'll move down here and do this one by hand. And this one you may want to use a 1/4 inch torque wrench. I have the 3/8 here. Alright, so now it's just about putting everything back on the valve cover. So let's see here. We've got our oxygen sensor wire down there. We'll clip that back in first. There's that. And this one over here. Vacuum bracket back in. You can see it's got a lot of curves to it. There we go, sort of. Underneath there. Okay, here we are. Okay, so now that I've got the vacuum bracket back in, I'm going to put the bolts in. Remember, the smallest bolt of these three, that one goes back here on the fuel rail. So I'll put that in. And I'll put these two in. There we go. And this one. Tighten those down. Spec is probably about 9 foot-pounds. I'm just going to tighten it down with the impact. All right, so we'll put the hoses back on now. The ones in the front, pretty easy. These three here. We've got this hose right there. Like that. We've got a hose underneath here that goes back in here, right by the second fuel injector. All right, so after briefly consulting my pictures, I got the hoses back on, so definitely take pictures if you're not sure about how these go back. It's easy to say you're going to remember it, but a lot of times that doesn't happen. Now I'm going to move on to attaching the rest of the stuff on the back. So again, these two brackets back here, we didn't take those off, which is good. We didn't have to do that. So I'm going to put this one over here on, like so. Snap that in there. Snap that on. Put that in here. Snap this one back on the bracket over here. There we go. Got our EGR back there also. Put that back on the bracket. We've got our fuel injectors. We'll put all those back on where they go. There's one here. Go ahead and pop this one back on. And pop this one back on. Okay, so all of our fuel injectors are connected again. Slide that back down. I'm going to put this on there. And so I think everything in this vicinity is all taken care of. Alright, so we're going to start working on this side. I'll put the ignition coils in last. So I've got a bracket right here in the front. There we go. Get that started again. That's a 10 millimeter, by the way. Okay, that's tight. This hose right here, put that back in. We need to put our bracket back on right here. That is this one. Try to get this underneath there. There we go. And line that up. Put that on like so. And then we'll put our hose back on the pipe. Grab our pliers. Slide the clamp back down. There we go. So now the last thing to do is go ahead and put our coils back in. Okay. We'll tighten those down. Those are 8 millimeters. Again, I'm not going to really worry about the torque spec on this. I'm just going to tighten them down nice and tight. We'll put our connectors back on. Make sure they snap on. There we go. Then up here we've got this clip too to put in. Get that back on there. Back on our bracket. And so this side is all finished. Now we'll move to the other side.